All right, let's just dive right into this one. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really chilling analysis of the 2026 Great Middle East War. We're going to reconstruct the anatomy of a conflict that literally reshaped global security, looking specifically at the data, the timelines, and the intense strategic maneuvers of what's known as Operation Epic Fury.
And wow, it is a massive topic. I mean, we're talking about military strategy, geopolitical maneuvering, and incredibly advanced technology all just colliding at once.
Exactly. And honestly, the absolute best way to wrap our heads around an event of this magnitude is to see exactly how all these crazy pieces fit together. Right, and before we get into all the stealth bombers and the lasers, I want to pose the core question that's kind of hanging over all of this data. How on earth did a regional conflict in the Middle East in 2026 manage to bring the entire global economy to its absolute knees? Because looking at the sources, this definitely didn't just stay in the desert.
Yeah, that is the defining question, isn't it? To understand that economic collapse, we really have to trace the domino effect. And the thing is, that first domino, it didn't actually fall in 2026.
To map out this rapid escalation, the roots actually trace all the way back to October 7th, 2023. That unprecedented attack created what intelligence reports literally call a ring of fire. It was this coordinated multi-front proxy war across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. Israel was basically forced into permanent mobilization.
Okay, so the tension was already at a boiling point for years then.
Oh, absolutely. And then by late 2025, international intelligence confirmed a really terrifying development. Iran had actually crossed the nuclear threshold, reaching 90% enrichment. Then, early 2026 hits us. We see this intense assassination cycle, mysterious deaths of high-ranking Iranian IRGC generals and even the supreme leader. This just sends Tehran into a total spiral of vengeance, which leads directly to the massive retaliation of February 2026.
Well, this brings up another absolutely crucial question. We've got proxy wars, we've got tension, but what pushed things past the absolute breaking point? Like, what was the specific catalyst that forced such an unprecedented military response before the bombers even took off? So, the sources point to a highly volatile combination of three specific factors, all colliding at once. First up, as we just mentioned, that 90% nuclear enrichment threshold. Suddenly, for the international community, the whole shadow war thing became a very real existential threat.
Right. And geopolitically, the landscape back in the U.S. had totally shifted, right?
Yes, exactly. The returning Trump administration brought an America First doctrine back to the table, and they viewed a nuclear-armed Iran as a strictly non-negotiable threat. When you combine that hardline stance with Iran totally abandoning its strategic patience because of those assassinations, well, you get a perfect storm. Both sides really believed that only major direct action could secure their positions.
Let's move into the modern warfare masterclass, covering Operation Epic Fury and digital darkness.
Okay, so this is where all that theoretical tension just explodes into actual combat on February 28th, 2026.
It does, and the sheer scale here is just staggering. 400 within hours, U.S. F-35s and B-2 bombers hit over 400 targets across Iran.
Wait, in just a few hours?
Yes, literally just a few hours. They systematically dismantled command centers and air defense batteries. They even dropped those massive GBU-57 bunker buster bombs on secret underground air bases hidden deep in the mountains. The seismic shocks were so massive that neighboring countries actually mistook them for natural earthquakes.
But the crazy thing is, the physical bombs were only half the story. The attack was paired with what the sources describe as Operation Digital Darkness. This was a completely AI-driven cyber strike that paralyzed the country's energy grids, water systems, and military networks. It was basically Stuxnet 3.0, but deployed on a nationwide, totally catastrophic scale.
Exactly. It was a perfectly synchronized digital and physical assault.
And this brilliantly illustrates the massive technological gap that emerged almost instantly. On one side, you have the US and Israel utilizing Space Force orbital assets to jam communications, combined with these high-tech stealth bombers.
Right, and on the other side?
Because of that massive cyber strike, Iranian leadership was literally forced back into the 20th century. They were relying on footrunners and analog radios just to communicate with their surviving units. It really shows you how quickly a modern society goes completely dark when the digital grid is pulled. I mean, imagine your entire city just shutting down instantly. But wait, Iran wasn't completely defenseless here. How did their advanced weaponry, specifically those hypersonic missiles, actually change the rules of the battlefield during this assault? Now, that is a truly historic piece of this conflict.
Iran unleashed its Fateh-2 hypersonic missiles. This was the very first time hypersonic technology was actively used and actually countered in real warfare.
Wow. And how did that play out?
Well, Israel deployed its Arrow 3 upper atmosphere interceptors, and while a few missiles did manage to break through the shield, the data shows that the vast majority were successfully intercepted way up in the upper atmosphere. It was a completely unprecedented test of modern missile defense. And speaking of unprecedented defense, the source material highlights another detail that sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. Israel's Iron Beam laser system was actually used on the ground. It successfully intercepted hundreds of incoming mortar shells. It proved in real time that laser warfare is absolutely no longer science fiction. It is an active, functional battlefield asset now. All right, let's transition over to the global economic meltdown, focusing on the choke point at the Strait of Hormuz. So, while the skies were filled with lasers and hypersonic missiles, the true devastation for the rest of the world was unfolding at sea. In retaliation for the strikes, Iran mined the Strait of Hormuz. They unleashed hundreds of suicide boats and anti-ship missiles, and by doing so, they effectively choked off 20% of the world's total oil supply. Just think about that. 1/5 of global energy just trapped.
Which naturally leads immediately to absolute market panic.
$155 per barrel for Brent crude. That is just a devastating spike.
Oh, it completely shattered global supply chains. When oil hits $155 a barrel, the cost of moving literally anything, food, medicine, consumer goods, just skyrockets. Dozens of airlines and shipping companies faced immediate existential threats. Basically, it means the price of everything you buy at the grocery store jumps overnight. It affected every single person's wallet.
So, the really crucial point to grasp here is that this chaos was everywhere. It was not localized at all.
Right. You had record-high gas prices sparking massive protests across the US and Europe. There was a looming global food crisis because international shipping was paralyzed, and down south, the Houthis in Yemen were launching advanced Iranian ballistic missiles, creating a Red Sea blockade that basically forced global trade to abandon the Suez Canal entirely and reroute all the way around Africa.
Yeah, and economically, as major banks faced these retaliatory cyber attacks, panicked investors fled the traditional financial system entirely. It triggered a massive rush into gold and Bitcoin, looking for any safe haven. The global banking system was literally facing its greatest security test in history. Now we reach the nuclear brink, superpowers, and ultimatums. This right here was undoubtedly the most dangerous phase of the conflict. We mentioned the shifting political doctrine in the US earlier. Well, the Trump administration issued a strict 24-hour ultimatum to the Iranian military. The doctrine was starkly simple. Clear the mines from the Strait of Hormuz within 24 hours, or the United States would enact the total destruction of the Iranian Navy. And the sources note that this America First rhetoric heavily polarized the international community. But impartially speaking, it did establish an incredibly rigid, clear boundary for the conflict moving forward. So, how did the other global superpowers react to a threat like that? Well, they ended up playing a very, very dangerous shadow game. Russia supplied critical satellite intelligence to Iran. Meanwhile, China stepped in as a silent economic lifeline by continuing to purchase ghost oil, completely ignoring the blockade. But importantly, they stopped right there. Both countries abstained from entering the war directly. The data shows they deliberately stayed out of direct combat, specifically to avoid triggering a nuclear escalation with the United States. We were walking a terribly thin line.
Which brings us to peace mediation, the Islamabad Protocols. Fortunately for everyone, that thin line actually held. The major turning point was brokered by Pakistan, who stepped in to act as a neutral mediator. They hosted these secret negotiations that became known as the Islamabad Protocols.
And this is incredibly significant because, according to the source material, this was the very first time high-ranking U.S. and Iranian officials were actually forced to sit down in the exact same room together.
Exactly. And let's be real. They were driven to that table by the mutual, absolutely terrifying realization that they were staring down a total, unrecoverable regional collapse.
But, it wasn't just external pressure forcing Iran's hand. By March 2026, the regime was facing a massive domestic crisis, too. Young citizens, who were just completely exhausted by war and poverty, actually started an uprising. So Iran found itself fighting a two-front war, bombs from above, and a serious domestic revolt from below.
Yeah, and that internal collapse was the final push they needed. On April 8, 2026, a ceasefire was finally signed. It effectively redrew the entire map of the Middle East, drastically diminishing Tehran's regional influence and actually cementing a brand new security alliance between Israel and Sunni Arab nations.
Let's look at the fallout in a trillion-dollar lesson, the true cost of 2026.
So, when the dust settled, what was the final bill for this incredibly short but totally devastating conflict? $2.1 trillion. That is the estimated global cost of the 2026 Great Middle East War. Once you factor in the massive physical destruction, the completely rerouted global shipping, the insane cyber damage, and those unprecedented energy shocks, the financial toll is just staggering to comprehend.
And it leaves us all with this final, lingering thought. This entire conflict started as a localized, regional dispute in the Middle East. Yet it threatened the entire global banking system, it shut down major international shipping routes, and it nearly triggered a superpower nuclear exchange. With peace costing $2.1 trillion, can the world really afford another local war? Or does 2026 prove once and for all that, in our hyperconnected, globalized world, isolation is just a complete myth? It's a heavy question and definitely one we'll all be grappling with for decades to come. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, everyone.